What's going on, everybody? It's Joel here, and today we're doing the review of the R.A.D. V2. So it's been almost exactly 3 years since the R.A.D. originally came out and took the training world by storm. These things have been probably the best training shoe over the course of the last 3 years, and that's probably not about to change anytime soon. I still think that the original R.A.D. are quite possibly one of the best training shoes of all time, at least in the top 5 training shoes, and they still hold up in 2025. But of course, all good things must come to an end at some point, and the R.A.D. are now being discontinued, and what's taking their place is the R.A.D. V2. So they're not going with the R.A.D. 2 name, and my theory behind that is that R.A.D. 2 it doesn't have the same ring as R.A.D. 1, but that's all my own speculation. I have actually no clue. The reception so far has been pretty polarizing. You either love it or you hate it. But from my memory, the R.A.D. was not initially all that well received in the first place either. It took some getting used to that look because it was different at the time from pretty much every other training shoe. The design was brand new. It looked more like a sneaker than like a training shoe. And I think that's kind of the same thing that we're seeing with the R.A.D. 2. Do I think the R.A.D. 2s look better than the R.A.D. I think it just kind of depends on how you want to look at it. The R.A.D. kind of have like a more classic minimal sneaker design, whereas the R.A.D. 2s have more of an athletic, almost kind of like a basketball shoe design. And I think it just goes to the designer of the shoe, which was Tom Barrand, and he has made legendary sneakers for Nike. But I really think that people just need a little bit of time to warm up to the design. So with that, let's talk about the construction of the V2s. The major change with these is that you'll see there's a lot more mesh throughout the upper of the shoe, primarily in the toe box, which is almost entirely made out of that new mesh material. There are some overlays, one on the lateral side. It doesn't actually cover the entire lateral side. It's just kind of like a stripe that ends right before the eye stay. And then on the big toe side, there's a more reinforced one. You can see that it's a little bit raised. And those are there to give the shoe more targeted support in those areas. Obviously, there's a little bit of protection that's happening from them, but it's really just to make sure that your foot's not sliding around inside of the shoe. Now, the benefit you're getting of having more mesh around the shoe is that the shoe's gonna be more breathable, which was one of the biggest issues of the R.A.D. And also, it's gonna be more flexible. It's gonna be more willing to move with your foot. Now, taking a look at the medial side of the shoe, we have more of that mesh, and then we have a pretty familiar suede material that runs around the shoe and acts like a containment piece for your foot. The suede material is going to be a little bit more taut, and it's not going to allow your foot to slide around quite as much as the mesh material. Another big change from the V1s is that the ankle collar is much more padded in this year's model and provides greater heel lockdown. The material that lines it is also smoother and not as textured as the V1s. That was another area of durability that they've corrected from the original release. Now, taking a look at the lacing system of the V2s, it's a pretty similar design to the V1s in that it's a webbed lacing design. So there are some loops underneath of the upper or around the eye stay, and then those loops run down the sides of the shoe to give you a lockdown customized fit. They did also add a little TPU piece over the top eyelet to give it a more secure fit around the ankle as well. The tongue on the shoe is nice and padded. It's very similar in cushioning to the ankle collar, and the shoe is gusseted in the inside so it doesn't like shift around when you move in these shoes. Now, moving on to the back part of the shoe, we have a TPU clip that acts as a heel stabilizer and also also helps you slide up the wall when you're doing handstand push-ups. It's a little bit of a tacky kind of feeling TPU, but in my testing, it worked well enough. It worked just about as well as any of the other TPU clips when doing handstand push-ups, but it actually does an outstanding job in stabilizing the shoe. And the reason I say that is because on this year's model, there's a lot more exposed foam compared to last year's, which had absolutely no exposed foam and instead had a TPU wrap that extended the entire length of the shoe. That helped keep the shoe stable while still retaining comfort. The midsole material on this shoe is still called swell foam. It's an EVA foam, but this year's it's retuned to be more responsive overall. When I first put my wear testers on, I thought the shoe felt a little bit more flatter and also a little bit softer, if you could believe that. But the stack height is still 12 millimeters in the front, 18 millimeters in the back, and it is a 6 millimeter drop. Putting the shoes on side by side, I thought the V2s had a more gradual, more flatter feeling drop than the V1s, but it is the same offset overall. All right, so now let's take a look at the elephant in the room, the waves. The waves are the sidewall on this shoe. Like I said, there's no more TPU wrap that extends around the shoe, and the reason for that change was because the TPU would eventually fail when doing rope climbs. Rubber is more durable than TPU, but it's also more heavy than TPU is. So the way that they designed the shoe is that they strategically made a dip in it so that it would cut down on the weight of the shoe because of that extra weight that they were gonna get from having a rubber sidewall. So the durability is gonna be better in that area, but obviously we have a more polarizing design than last year's model. Like I said, it takes a little bit of time, it'll grow on you, and I actually think that the V2s look pretty good now. But the functional change and durability of it should trump the aesthetic standpoint. Now taking a look under the shoe, we still have that herringbone tread pattern throughout the rubber outsole, though there are now some breaks in the forefoot to aid in flexibility. During my testing, I noticed that the rubber outsole on the V2s was not as grippy, or it was a little bit more picky about what surfaces that it wanted to grip compared to the V1s. If the shoe is dirty and the floor is dirty, the grip is not so good. But if you have clean flooring or you just clean off the bottom of your shoes, then the grip is actually pretty decent. It's not anything to write home about, and I would say it's probably the worst aspect of the V2s. Now going on to another change that is not so great about the V2s, and that's the fact that they weigh a pretty good amount more than the V1s. On average, I would get the V1s in at about 12.5 ounces, give or take a few. And we're talking about the suede models. If we're talking about the leather models, that would go up maybe about half an ounce. The V2s though, clock in at about 14 ounces for a men's size 10.5. That is kind of the standard when talking about training shoes right now, but I still do not like any increase of weight in shoes. I still think that 14 ounces for a training shoe is a little bit on the bloated side, but when comparing it to other shoes, it just falls right in line. When it comes to sizing your R.A.D. 1 V2s, I'm gonna recommend that you just go with your normal R.A.D. 1 sizing. There are some differences in the way that the shoes fit, namely in the toe box. Everybody asked for a wider toe box, and they delivered on that. The toe box is a little bit more open in terms of volume, and they decreased the amount of angle on the big toe side. So your big toe has a little bit more room to splay. But even with the increased toe box width, I don't think that you should size your V2s down. The difference in toe box width doesn't make these shoes particularly wide shoes. It just makes them more accessible and more wearable. The safe bet is to just get the same size that you were wearing in your original R.A.D. 1s. From what I understand, the thought process behind the design of the V2s was to make a more performance-oriented training shoe, which sounds kind of crazy because of how high-performing the V1s was, but hear me out. The V2s are actually a better performing shoe, as crazy as that sounds. And the reason for that is because they basically took everything from the V1s and just made it a little bit better. So because we have that mesh upper, the shoe is more breathable, which, like I said before, was one of the biggest issues with the originals. And the shoe is even more flexible throughout. The shoe feels now like an extension of your foot. It feels like second skin. The upper is super pliable. It moves with your feet really well. And it just kind of feels like a nice hug. It's not too tight. It's not too soft. It's just right. I've heard of other testers preferring this shoe for running, and I think that just comes down to personal preference. I think that overall the shoe is a more flexible shoe, and the cushioning is softer and still more responsive than the V1s. But what kills me for running is the fact that they weigh more. But honestly, when it comes to the runs that you're doing in a typical CrossFit workout, 200, 400, up to 800, I think these shoes are gonna do just fine. Are they gonna be my first pick for doing a running workout? Absolutely not. But when it comes to running, I still think that these are still pretty good trainers to run in. If you're not somebody that runs with a lead foot like myself, then you're probably gonna like these better than the V1s. So while I didn't like running in the V2s as much as the V1s, I thought that the extra heft had no negative consequences when doing body weight movements or plyometric movements. The increased flexibility, breathability, and cushioning in these shoes makes them a better shoe overall to do movements inside of the box. They're even more comfortable for longer sets of burpees, box jumps, and double unders where you don't necessarily have to worry about the weight so much while still remaining totally responsive when you're really pushing the pace. And when it came to lifting, these shoes really took me by surprise. The original R.A.D ones are a shoe that I thought were good enough for most lifts, but not something that I would really want to max out with. I would probably try it because I just like lifting and training shoes, but it wasn't totally confidence inspiring. And when I first put the V2s on, I thought that they were gonna be kind of like that. I actually thought that the V2s felt a little bit too soft. But when you put these things under load, the responsiveness of the midsole really kicks in. I managed to squat 425 pounds in these shoes just yesterday, and I didn't notice really any instability from the midsole or the fact that they don't have that TPU wrap. The heel on these shoes is still extremely responsive. Cycling the barbell for Olympic weightlifting movements was extremely comfortable, very responsive. I never felt like I was losing my footing with these shoes. The only issue that I ever had was when my platform was dusty and I hadn't cleaned it off, and that dust affected the grip of these shoes. If you can't clean off the flooring that you're on, just clean off the bottom of your shoes. It's gonna make the grip on the shoes a lot better. Doing my Olympic weightlifting movements in these shoes was as good, if not better, than the originals. Like I said, the midsole is super responsive. It's got a lot more pop to it than the V1s, which is gonna take some getting used to. The V1s compressed a good amount. If you compress them enough, would just stop and then they would become a really dense midsole. This midsole in comparison is gonna give you much more of a pop and spring back. So it's gonna feel really nice for your jumping movements. And when it comes to landing your Olympic weightlifting movements, the extended sidewall does a great job in making sure that your foot stays secure and doesn't bleed over the sides of the shoe, giving you that lateral stability to stabilize your lifts. I tested these shoes also for rope climbs, not my Sunny Limes because I didn't want to get those dirty, but I did test my black wear test pair, and as you can see, there's virtually no damage. I honestly didn't do hundreds of rope climbs in these shoes, but I did enough to probably cause damage on a pair of shoes. And as you can see, the rubber rope guard works as promised. The grip is pretty good. It's not like the greatest compared to some of the best shoes, but it's totally adequate. And when it comes to overall durability, I think that these shoes are gonna do a better job than the originals. All right, so the V2s come in at the same exact price as the V1s at $150. Now, the big question on everybody's mind is, should you or do you need to upgrade to the V2s. If you are 100% content with your V1s, then there is really no reason to upgrade. As I mentioned earlier, the R.A.D ones are some of the greatest training shoes of all time. But if you were to ask me to do a workout and you gave me the choice of using either of these shoes, I would go with the V2s all day long. They basically take everything that was good about the originals and make them better. The V2s are a better performing shoe in almost every aspect. The only thing that I didn't like the V2s for as much as the V1s was for running, but if you gave me a running workout, then I would wear running shoes. So 99% of the time, I would take the V2s for workouts, with that 1% being a pretty running heavy workout. Now, when it comes to the way that the shoes look, I think that the original R.A.D ones are some of the best performing and best looking training shoes of all time. This silhouette is gonna go down in the history books of training shoes. But that does not mean that I don't like the way that the V2s look. The V2s might look a little bit more athletic, maybe a little bit more sporty overall, but if you're into sneakers, I feel like you're gonna like the design of the V2s. I am not here to sell you on the way that the V2s look. If you don't like them, you don't like them. If you like them, great. But what I will reiterate is that the V2s are a better performing shoe than the V1s. No question about it. And if performance is what you care about, then you should definitely look at the V2s. If you guys have any questions about the R.A.D 1 V2, feel free to leave them in the comment section. And as always, guys, please hit that like button, subscribe, and thanks for watching.